between. When we visit Buffalo, region of Kaegebein, me and my brother just been. For song singing, laughing, Republican Kaegebein's away are just what they seem.
Now we'll have the instrumental trio by the Al Crassus.
What's that? No, that's right. have a request for Forever and Ever. Gretchen will play it on the organ.
That's okay, good enough. How many like that? Give them another clap. Okay, we'll have Keith Zimmerman now give her poem.
We're going to put you up on a stand. Mind? Would you like to stand up on here? Oh, boy. Now we're in business, but good. Now you go to it. I'll do it.
It started with 2, and it's growing yet. The Kaegebein family, how big can it get? We'll feed 100 with 1, 2, 6. The Kaegebein family, how big can it get?
Peggy Kaegebein, piano solo.
That's nice going, isn't it?
Now I'd like to play Ethel Smith's arrangement of Tico Tico. Now, folks, we have a big surprise for you. The grandsons and granddaughters of Akron, I hear, are going to give us a treat right now. You ain't behind me, no. How's he going to hear it? Where's the pianist? All right. Meeting at reunion is the thing we like to do. We greet our cousins from afar, our aunts and uncles too. We look the boyfriends over and kiss the babies new. Meeting at reunion is the thing we like to do. We bat the ball, we eat the food, and pitch the horseshoes too. We sing our songs, we shoot the breeze, and play a little too. 108 plus 20 make the Kaegebein Reunion. Meeting at reunion is the thing we like to do. Second chorus. The winters are from Akron, and it looks like a broom. We will win the prizes on Centennial afternoon. We have a few copies of this. Would you all like to sing that song? Well, some of my girls and boys will pass out copies. Here we go. All right, let's sing it all together. Let's have a little introduction first, Sue. Here we go. Meeting at reunion is the thing we like to to do. We greet our cousins from and uncles too. We look the boyfriends over and kiss our babies new. Meeting at reunion is the thing we like to do. We bat the ball, we eat the food and pitch the horseshoes too. We sing our songs, we shoot the breeze and pray a little too. 108 plus 20 makes the Kaegebein Reunion. Meeting at reunion is the thing we like to do. We didn't have much time. We only wrote it in a half hour this morning.
Now we'll have a poem by Sharon Cross.
Shall I tell you a secret? I bet you couldn't guess. For all the days of summer, I like reunion best.
And now a tap dance by Patsy Long.
Faster, Gretchen. Oh, you start. Follow you.
Now we'll have a piano solo by Laura Grillinger. And by the way, folks, Mother requested this about a month before she died, that Laura play this today. solo by Dan Kaegebein. No, I don't. Come up here, Danny, will you? Bring your trumpet up here.
A woodpecker pecked out a little round hole and made him a house and a telephone pole. One day when I watched, he poked out his head and had a hood and a collar. The rain pours out of the sky and sparkles of lightning flashes by, and the big, big wheels thunder rolling, snuggle back in his telephone pole.
Does it still work?
Kramer sold $1 million.
Back up just a little bit. Okay, that's fine. Go right ahead.
If I had $1 million, I wouldn't buy a train. I wouldn't buy a teleset. I wouldn't buy a plane. I would spend my $1 million for the place of greatest charm. I would head right out for Rockland and buy my grandma's farm.
And now a song by the Alcrosses.
Take this mic inside, folks. Okay. Wait a minute. Go ahead. You all right? Can you hear all right? When Grandpa K was serenading Grandma, he sure was starting lots of history. For then he couldn't tell her we'd have names like Long and Scheller when they started in to raise this family. You're adorable,
Betty,
you're so beautiful,
Carol,
you're a cutie full of charms.
Dave,
You're a darling,
Ann,
you're exciting, and
Fred,
you're a fella from the farm.
Gert,
You look good to me,
Hilda,
you're so heavenly.
Irwin,
You're the one we idolize.
Janet,
Just said I will.
Kay,
You're so kissable.
Lillian,
Has the love light in her eyes.
Martha, Nana, old Keith,
I could go on all day.
Queen Rose, Susan, Penn,
Alphabetically speaking, you're okay.
you,
Made my life complete.
by,
You're so very sweet.
WXYZ.
It's fun to wander through these family names with you, to tell you what they mean to me.
All again. And
You're adorable,
Betty,
you're so beautiful,
Carol,
you're a cutie full of charms.
Dave,
You're a darling,
Ann,
you're exciting,
Fred,
you're a fella from the farm.
Gert,
You look good to me,
Hilda,
you're so heavenly,
Irwin,
you're the one we idolize.
Janet,
Just said I will.
Kay,
You're so kissable,
Lillian,
has the love light in her eyes.
Martha, Nana, old Keith,
I could go on all day.
Queen Rose, Susan, Penn,
Alphabetically speaking, you're okay.
you,
Made my life complete.
by,
You're so very sweet.
WXYZ.
It's fun to wander through these family names with you to tell you what they mean to me.
Well, folks, they say you leave good things to last. I don't know. But now we're going to have a special treat. How about Herb Berwick coming up here and give us a resume of his trips across?
Somebody wants to know, are we going to have a baseball game?
Where are you going to play it?
Any place you want to go. You play out here if you think it's big enough. We paying taxes for that? Seems that...
I'll send over there to the stage.
Okay.
Just remember that this is a command performance.
This is Doc Berwick talking on his trip to Europe.
And that I can't sing, and I can't dance, and I can't act.
We agree.
And if I possessed the fazzled tongue of the man who just made that comment, perhaps I could say in 15 minutes what I would like to take 2 hours. As you all know, I recently completed a 14,000-mile round trip by air to Europe, chiefly to the cities of Vienna, Rome, and Paris. Can you hear me all right? That my object in going was to spend 2 weeks with my old chief in Vienna, with whom I studied 10 years ago, to renew my acquaintance with him and to, shall I say, review some of the special techniques which he alone masters better than anyone else in the world. However, the last week I had an opportunity to travel around the city of Vienna, visiting friends and talking to people in all walks of life, meaning by that clergy, businessmen, professional people, tradesmen, working men. I remember Vienna as I saw it 10 years ago. In some parts it has greatly changed. In some parts, it is impossible to walk a city block without seeing one or more buildings wholly or partly demolished. Intercourse between the different sectors of the city is completely free. There are signs which tell you that you're leaving the American zone and entering the Russian zone, or leaving the Russian zone and entering the British zone. But no one checks you as you travel to and fro between the zones. But you know that you are in the Russian zone, because in the Russian zone there has been no attempt made whatsoever to repair the ravages and damages of war, other than to repair the streets so that traffic may proceed, and the bridges, of course, to allow traffic to go that way. As a matter of fact, I recall one building with only the outer walls standing, and it is a good-sized building with the insides completely gutted, in which Dr. Werner told me at the time were still, they guessed, about 185 bodies still buried under the debris, with no attempt whatsoever made to recover those bodies. I'll admit that bringing down the walls, or rather removing the debris from the center of the building, in order to recover the bodies would be a very hazardous task, because as soon as that happens, the walls come down, and as soon as that happens, then the walls on the buildings of either side, that their supports would also be greatly damaged, so that it would invite a collapse of the buildings on either side. Nevertheless, no attempt has been made. You also know that you're in the Russian zone because the Russian soldiers are there, and the Russian police stand duty, traffic duty, mind you, with machine guns slung over their shoulders. At first, I presume, they did it because they thought it necessary. I was told, perhaps it was a pun, I don't know, that now they carry it for self-defense. I wouldn't know. You also know that you're in the Russian zone because of the red banners that you see everywhere in the Russian zone. You see them in some of the other zones. but strikingly so do you see them in the Russian zone. It seems a bit incongruous to see the American flag over there where I never saw it before, except over the American embassy 10 years ago. Now you see it flying all through the American zone. But more than incongruous, something that gives you a cold shiver is to see the red banner on so many buildings. I've been asked how the Viennese like the communists. Well, they hate them. And they have reason to hate them. If some of the stories I have heard were not exaggerated, and I have reason to believe from actual eyewitnesses the stories that were told to me, they have every reason to hate communism with all their heart and soul. And if you people over here, and if those in the United States could see what the communists have done over there, then those of us who hate communism, for all that it represents in ideology and otherwise, you would no longer use the word communist as a communist class, because it doesn't connote the significance and the meaning of the word that it means to me. To me, I place them in a class with Benedict Arnold, and I think they should be so called. The Communistic Party should be put down on the polls as a Benedict Arnold party. When I say they committed travesties of justice, when I say they committed outrages against the people of Vienna, then I'm only repeating what they have done wherever communism has advanced into countries not alone Russia. They attacked women. My old chief told me that he had patience. Look about you, pick out a 4-year-old. Look about you and pick out a woman who is 85, if there be one present. The Russian soldiers, it didn't matter. It was a woman. In order to protect the women in his hospital, he's a gynecologist and an obstetrician, he himself had to live in the hospital, so that when the soldiers night after night came to attack, criminally assault the patients, he would stand at the doorway, and he's a dignified gentleman, very imposing in a white coat. He'd stand at the doorway, and in a few words of Russian which he understood and which impressed the Russian soldiers, he said, "Out, this is no place for you." Do these things still happen today? Well, 3 months before I got there, Mrs. Werner was walking. They lived just on the outskirts of the Russian zone, and she was out for a walk in the evening, when a Russian soldier came up to her and attempted by force to remove a beautiful diamond ring which she had received from her late father. She screamed, clenched her fists. Soon assistance came and took away the Russian soldier. I was not allowed to leave the city limits itself. I have friends who live outside of the city, and I made really a very determined attempt to receive permission from the authorities to go out of the city. It was only about 2 hours train ride. I went first of all to the American embassy, and they chased me from one department to another. The final decision was no. They said they could put in such a request, that it would receive attention in about 3 or 4 months, that at that time they hadn't had an affirmative response to such a request in some 3 months, that only one had been granted in 6 months, so I gave it up. They came in to see me. They, too, related to me the things that happened outside of the city. Now, the city itself suffered, and suffered badly. The Russians came in and took what food supplies were there. They relieved the people of their jewelry. They relieved the people of their watches. They would ask you casually, "And what time is it?" And if you'd say, "Oh, 3 o'clock, thanks for the watch." Some of the Russian soldiers had as many as 12 watches on their person at one time. It seems that watches, particularly wristwatches, for the Russian soldier held a particular or peculiar fascination. At any rate, they claimed everything that was of value. As a matter of fact, finally, they became so fussy that if the clothes you had on weren't good enough to suit them, they wouldn't relieve you of your clothes anymore. They say, "No good, mine better." In order to, the women finally found out one way in which to protect themselves. They'd learn the words, the Russian words for, "Don't touch me, I'm sick." That would stop most of them, unless they were more than average drunk, and most of the time they were. I heard a lot of things in Vienna. I only want to emphasize 2 or 3 more things about Vienna before I pass on. See, I haven't the 2 hours that I asked for. The Austrians, and by that I mean chiefly the Viennese, are most grateful to us as Americans for the assistance that we have given them. They never stopped telling me that from morning, noon, and night. They said without our help, they would be completely Russian-dominated. They only cannot understand, neither can most of us, they cannot understand why we allow the Russians to take Vienna, why we didn't take it first and keep them out. They expressed great admiration for late President Roosevelt. I couldn't concur in that, but I didn't say anything derogatory, though I was tempted. They have one fear, not of another war. As a matter of fact, the fear of war over there is not half as great as it was over here when I left, which publicly I wish to announce here to anyone who raises that question again, is a reason why Gertrude didn't go with me, is because we were afraid there might be a war starting, and that I alone, should a war start, could get through much more easily than I could if I had her with me. However, when I got over there, there was very little talk of war, so that when the Russians accused us of being warmongers at the time, I definitely must admit it would so seem from the newspaper accounts that we were reading daily and the things that we heard from our radio news correspondents. They have one fear, a real fear, that we will leave and allow the Russians to come in. I couldn't answer that, except that I didn't think that was likely. And then I started a little counter-propaganda of my own to build up their morale. I said that they needn't have any fears about the next war. They said, we know you'll win the next war. I said, yes, you're darn right we'll win the next war, if there is one, and we hope there won't be, because we have airplanes. I stretched this a lot, but I had to make it good. I said we had airplanes that could come from Los Angeles and travel right across the continent all the way to Moscow, drop atom bombs, and fly back to Los Angeles. They looked at me and said, you really do? I said, positively, only it's a state secret. Well then, the other high spot of my trip was Rome. Ever since I read about Rome as a schoolboy, I had an awful hankering to see that city of the old Romans. So taking advantage of the opportunity that I was there in Europe, I determined to go to Rome. At the same time, I also wanted to have an audience with the Pope. So I sought out one of my Catholic friends, and he consulted Monsignor Loftus. Monsignor Loftus said that was very easily arranged, and they sent a cablegram to Rome that I would be there during such and such a week and that I would be requesting such an audience. Now, I'm making a point of this description of my reception because I heard so much drivel and nonsense about what goes on during such a reception that I thought you might like to know what it really is like. So when I got to Rome, I also brought with me a letter from Monsignor Loftus to Monsignor Landy. I arrived Saturday night. I waited till Monday morning. I went to see Monsignor Loftus, who is head of Worldwide Catholic Charities. I was ushered into the office. The secretary said, and she spoke very good English, he said, what is your business? I said, I'd like to see Monsignor Landy. Oh, she says, he's awfully busy this morning. I said, yes, but if you can get an appointment for me, I'll come back later. But I said, here's a letter. Will you please give it to Monsignor Landy? And then you can let me know. She came back 3 minutes later smiling. She said he will see you shortly. But here are some magazines for you to read. And she brings out a stack like this. I said, you expect me to read all those before I get in? She says, no, just one of them. But a few minutes later, ahead of a number of priests who were waiting their turn at an interview, I was ushered into Monsignor Landy, who was in uniform, and in excellent English he greeted me, and I said, my word, I hardly expected to find an Italian priest talking to me in such perfect English. Oh, he says, I don't think that's so remarkable. I was born, raised, and educated in Brooklyn. Why shouldn't I speak good English? He says, sit down, let's have a smoke. And he brings out a short pipe, and we chatted for about 30 minutes while the rest of his eager appointees outside had to wait their turn. Finally, he said, if you want an audience, yes. This was Monday morning. He says, tomorrow night, because you're leaving Thursday, tomorrow night in your hotel, in your box, there'll be a letter of invitation to see the Pope. If you fail to get it, call me Wednesday morning by phone, and it will be arranged. Tuesday evening, I had my invitation. Wednesday morning, I left to see the Vatican Museum around 10 o'clock, which, incidentally, is one of the finest museums I have ever seen, and I have seen a great many in this country and in Europe. I've never seen anything that equals it, even comes close to it, and that includes the Louvre, Berlin, Vienna, Budapest, and in this country, the Metropolitan, New York, Philadelphia, all of them. It is magnificent. I've never seen anything like it. Well, the guide showed me around, showed me the high spots. He knew I had an invitation to see the Pope. He said, you won't have to go around. Remember, the Vatican is a separate state. And I don't know just how many square miles it is, but it is quite in a state of its own. And I would have had to leave the museum early in order to take a cab and travel some 20 minutes to get around to the front of the church of St. Peter's and then find my way into wherever that reception room is. He took me right through the museum, opened the door, pushed me in, and he said, they'll tell you where to go. And I had my invitation in my hand. Some one of these attendants with curious uniforms designed by Michelangelo hundreds of years ago greeted me, took the invitation, escorted me into a room, a large rectangular room, and I guess I was a little late. I was supposed to be there at 12:30, but when I got there, the room was practically occupied, and I had to walk from one corner over a hardwood floor with my heels clumping and everybody looking at me and wondering who this lug is that's coming in. And there was a seat way over in the opposite end. Well, I walked and sat down, and this room, of course, was decorated with marvelous, beautiful, old tapestries, really magnificent. And the ceilings were decorated with paintings. I guess they were put on there centuries ago. Well, we sat there and waited, I guess, some 30 or 45 minutes, not a sound, only people whispering. Finally, another one of these attendants came in and called a number of us by name, including mine. We got up and we were escorted into another room, which was a much smaller room, and there were about 25 of us arranged in a semicircle, and they knew, whoever the attendant was, they knew exactly who each and every one of us were in place, in line, so there could be no mistake. We waited there about 15 or 20 minutes, and in walks the Pope. Now, before that, let me review some of the crazy things that I have heard I would have to do when I had my audience with the Pope. I would have to wear coat, white tie, tails, and so forth and so forth. I would have to crawl on my knees the length of a corridor from here over to yonder. I would have to kiss his feet, let alone his ring. Lord knows all the other things I was supposed to have to do. It's all nonsense. I wore an ordinary suit. I didn't have to kneel on my knees full length of this court here, anything like it. The Pope walks into the room. He has two of his attendants or staff behind him. We all of us promptly knelt and immediately arose, and then he stopped in front of each and every one of us, asked us who we were, where we came from, and those who had any questions to ask him, and some did, favors of one kind or another, he would answer that, and he speaks perfect English. Those who had rosaries or other religious objects that they wished to have blessed by him to take home to their relatives, he blessed them. Then he shook hands with us, blessed us individually. Now, that was for the Protestants. The Catholics knelt when he stood in front of them and kissed the ring. We Protestants didn't have to, and I imagine there might have been a Jew or two in there, too, and he didn't have to. Now, women and men were there alike. There was no differentiation in his attitude. to whether or not you knelt and kissed his ring. He just didn't differentiate at all. And I furthermore want to say that I never in my life have met a man whose personality, whose charm is as great as this Pope Pius. And that if I had the opportunity to know that man personally, if I could be assured of just spending 1 week with him, I'd leave tomorrow. That is the impression this man made upon me. He is the most striking, most magnificent personality that I have ever met, and I have met a great many fine people. He is tops, above them all. And that, I want to also assure you, is not, my impressions are not built up from the dress-up of the background, both spoken and pictured. He is a magnificent personality. I've never met anyone like him. Now about the church, after that, he shook hands and gave us a medal. He spent about 20 minutes with the 25 of us. We're divided up into language groups. Those who speak German were taken to another room, those who spoke Spanish to another, those who spoke French to another, and Italian to still another. He speaks Hungarian, French, Spanish, English, German. I don't know, there's about 10 of them, and he speaks them all well. The Church of St. Peter's is the most magnificent structure I've ever been in. It is large enough to hold 5 of our St. Paul's cathedrals, I should judge, 1 in each one of the crosses and 2 in the main stem, and still have room left over. Magnificent edifice. The top of the flagpole is about 600 feet above floor level. When we were there, they were making excavations underneath the church. And recently I read in a newspaper where they are announcing that they now believe to have discovered the original tomb of St. Peter's and believe it to be beneath the foundations of this magnificent edifice designed by Michelangelo. I was in the Sistine Chapel where, as you know, the College of Cardinals meets to elect a new pope. One corner of the room, the guide took me, he says, put your stone on that foot. Now, he says, having done that, when you go back home, he says, you tell your friends, you put your foot on the stone, where rests the stove, from which come the smoke signals, which signifies that a new pope has been elected. And he says, the pipe goes through an opening they make up yonder. The ceilings of the Sistine Chapel, the stories that you have read and the accounts and descriptions of the pictures are not one bit exaggerated. They're the most magnificent I've ever seen. They were, of course, put there by Michelangelo. It took him years to do it. As a matter of fact, you know, he died as a very old man. I don't know whether it was in the late 80s or the early 90s. And they tell me that he did some of that work in the 80s. Now, the ceiling, I don't remember whether it's 50 feet or 75 feet above floor level, but they tell me it was not unusual for this man in his 80s to put a few brush strokes on, and you know he painted lying down on his back, to put a few brush strokes on the ceiling like this, and then run down the scaffolding to the floor to look up to see what the effect was, then run back up again, lie down and put a few more strokes down, and then come back down to see what the effect was. Now, when a man of 80 has enough ambition to do that, then I think some of us youngsters, like George and myself and a few others who are 50 and who begin to think we're old men, we should be slightly embarrassed, shouldn't we, George? We are, but we won't admit it. Well, from Rome I went to Paris, and I went through a number of the public buildings, the most impressive of which was the Gardens of Versailles, the Palace of Versailles, which is a magnificent museum. We walked, my guide and myself, who incidentally was a very nice girl of 18 years, who was a niece of a doctor I met in Vienna. Oh, she guided me through the city, and I really saw it as few casual tourists have an opportunity to see it. And the Gardens of Versailles are magnificent, too. We walked for 3.5 hours and didn't begin to cover half of it. And we didn't retrace our steps, either. The buildings, of course, are extremely old. She told me one amusing thing about the palace. She said, it looks beautiful, and it is beautiful, but the plumbing is woefully inadequate because whoever designed the building forgot to put in toilets here and there, and whenever King Louis needed one, they'd bring one in on wheels on a carriage and then move out of the room. So some of the city is extremely old. Went up the Eiffel Tower. Some of you have done that. It's really a magnificent sight. Of course, in my own mind, I always kept thinking, well, we have the Empire State Building, and that's just a few feet high.